Okay, we're here today with Chris Hart, who is former state representative and vice president of Florida Tax Watch. Chris, why don't we're going to start a little bit differently than we have with some of the other interviews. Why don't you begin by just telling us about your background, how long you've been in Tallahassee, some of the different roles you've had, but then also why is workforce important to you?
Okay. Yeah. No, happy to. So I've been in and around politics and policy for the last 25 years. Actually started as an intern, which I would highly recommend to any student is to find a good internship. Started as an intern for Senator Javier Soto back in 1989. And since then, I've had roles ranging from serving as a legislative assistant to a legislator to the president and CEO of CareerSource Florida, which is focused on our state's workforce and labor needs, and most recently as Secretary of Commerce and president and CEO of Enterprise Florida in the world of economic development. I've also had kind of some rare opportunities that have come my way. I was able to serve in what we called a dual hat role, where I was both the president and CEO of Workforce Florida, at the same time the director of the former Office of Tourism, Trade, and Economic Development, and also served as the chairman of the Economic Recovery Oil Spill Task Force when we had that situation off our Gulf. So I've had an interesting career. My resume reads a little differently than most. It's not one that probably anybody would have ever gone and designed on their own. It just kind of happened through some good fortune and opportunities. Workforce. So you asked about workforce. I had an interesting beginning in the world of workforce, and it's kind of twofold. One, when I was serving as Senator John Grant's legislative assistant, a lot of time in that role, you work on constituent services. So what I focused on in that particular world was the old AFDC, so aid to families with dependent children. And so I saw what happens when you have welfare dependency. And then as time marched on, I actually ended up starting a business with a friend of mine, Mark Mant, Classified Technologies Group. And so we needed a trained, qualified workforce. So kind of brought that together in a few years hence, where I was serving as the state representative from the Tampa area, and had the opportunity to actually sponsor Florida's workforce bill. And it's where we merged workforce and economic development, and we are focused on ensuring that we have a demand-driven workforce system that allows us to reduce welfare dependency, a la the AFDC that I was exposed to, while we also help to increase economic self-sufficiency. And from my perspective, the best way to increase economic self-sufficiency is to ensure that people have the skill sets that are needed in today's marketplace, and even more importantly, in the marketplace of tomorrow.
You know, you're very uniquely qualified to answer our next question, and that's this. You know, we have Career Source Florida, we have Enterprise Florida Incorporated, we have the Department of Economic Opportunity, we have economic and demographic research, and of course we have the state university system and then the state board of colleges, or the state college system. Tell us about how all that interweaves and what really is the difference between, say, CareerSource and Enterprise Florida.
Okay, well, that's a big question. I'm gonna start. I'm gonna maybe start in a little bit different place. So when you take a look at CareerSource Florida, Enterprise Florida, our state college system, current technicals, our university system, all of those organizations, from my perspective, have been built to help us ensure that we're meeting the needs of the marketplace here in the state of Florida, and that we're helping people to achieve their hopes and their dreams and their aspirations. Whether it's a single mother of two that's simply trying to make her way in the world and increase her opportunities for her and her family, or if it's a business, a new to Florida business or an expanding Florida business. And so all of that comes together to help all of those to achieve some of the outcomes that they're looking for. CareerSource Florida, if you want to kind of just boil it down to its essence, it's ensuring that we have the right skills at the right time for Florida's industries. And so they work with individuals as well as businesses. And they work with individuals who are all along the spectrum, those that need the most help, including some of those people in our state who are, I guess you could call special needs in different ways, all the way to those who just need some skills development, upskilling, if you will. They work with businesses. I think last year they worked with over 80,000 businesses. So they're very much focused on ensuring that the business has the skilled talent that they need. Enterprise Florida, you boil that down, they're trying to help retain Florida businesses, help Florida businesses expand, and also help to attract businesses to our growing state. And so they focus in a number of ways on that marketplace. The big question I think that many of us have in the world of workforce and economic development is, what is the proper role for our schools? And when I say our schools, I mean our pre-K through 12, our current technicals, our colleges, and our universities. And so now, Bob, if I could, maybe I'll just take some liberties in terms of what I always saw that we were trying to achieve. When I was serving as president and CEO of CareerSource Florida, a big part of what we were trying to do with our board and with any of the recommendations that we had and with some of the limited funds that we had available to us, ensure that we're meeting the market's needs. And so we reached out to all those players that I just mentioned, and we talked to them about collaboration. And in terms of collaboration, we were always very specific, and that is that we wanted demand-driven solutions. And we had to spend a lot of time talking about demand-driven solutions. I had an hour-and-a-half long conversation with two of my good friends that were running state colleges at the time. And during the hour-and-a-half long conversation, probably about an hour and 15 minutes of it, we thought we were having just a splendid discussion and that we were all on the same page. And then something suddenly clicked, and I realized that perhaps while we were using the same term demand-driven, we didn't have the same definition of demand-driven. So I put a halt on the conversation and I asked them, could you please define for me for just a moment what you mean by demand-driven? And it was so interesting what came back to me. They said, well, of course, it's the students who are knocking on our doors and telling us about the courses that they would like to take. And I said, I understand that because of your model, your business model, if you will. You know, you are looking to fill your classrooms and ensure that you have professors there that can meet that particular demand. But when I'm talking about demand-driven, I'm really talking about ensuring that we have the skills necessary for Florida businesses, whether they're evolving, emerging, growing Florida businesses in our state. And so therein lies. Sorry.
So if I hear you correctly, It sounds almost like demand-driven. One is a perception of what the bricks and mortar institutional need is versus what the industry or business need is.
It's probably the most succinct way of putting that, and I think both need to be achieved. I mean, because we recognize that there is a business model in place. I'll tell you, if I could just give a shout out to one of our college presidents, and that's Jim Murdaugh, right here at Tallahassee Community College. He actually spent a lot of time with me and talked to me about the demand-driven model in terms of what we were looking to achieve, both at Enterprise Florida and at CareerSource Florida. And so he's actually taken a look at the top 10 demand occupations within his service territory, and he's ensuring that he has his curriculum designed around that, he has coursework designed around that, so that he can meet the needs of his local community. And I think that's a really good start. And he recognizes that that's a really good start. But he's balancing that demand along with the supply side demand that he has in terms of what the students are seeking to achieve. And he's spending a lot of time, and I think that's what our universities and colleges and career technicals need to do, and that is helping the students and their parents and guidance counselors understand what's out there in the marketplace, what looks like it will be out there in the marketplace in the future, and the types of skills that they need to have as they walk across and graduate.
So really both need to be achieved, and I think we're in agreement with that. Can both be achieved?
They can, yeah, without a doubt. Both can be achieved. It does take understanding on both sides as to what we currently have in place. what we could tweak in terms of the current standards that we have, the curriculum, the programs, the work experience that are required to either receive an industry certification or a degree of any type. And yeah, so yes, it can be achieved.
So when you were at CareerSource, there was a tool that you all had developed, and it was called the Market Intelligence Portal. My understanding is that portal is no longer available or no longer used, but what was the original goal for the Market Intelligence Portal? How was it to be used, and is there still a benefit there from what you can perceive right now? Is there still a benefit out there for that type of tool?
Yeah, there is. The Market Intelligence Portal was developed and designed out of pure necessity. And it came about because in the world of workforce, we are tied to economic development. And so every single person that we help in one of our career centers at CareerSource Florida, we want to ensure that those individuals have the opportunity to either have that first job, a better job, or a high skill, high wage job. And so we want to link any training or education that they have to real world opportunities. And we found the models that were in place previously just didn't quite get us there. They were good, and in some cases even good enough for the particular needs at the particular time. But we could see that as the economy was changing, as skill needs were changing, as business needs were changing, and rapidly evolving, right? So we always talk about how quickly things in the marketplace are moving and how skill sets are continuing to evolve and evolve faster than they ever had in the past. We needed some systems that could help us make better decisions, and that could help our partners, our collaborative partners, our universities, our colleges, career and technicals, anyone, public, private, to make better decisions at the curriculum, at the programmatic, and at the work experience levels. And so we started talking to economists, folks that are in the research field, business leaders, educators, basically every single person that we could talk to that was in the world of data and analytics. And I ended up getting a lot more involved in that, Bob, than I ever thought I would be. But again, I said it was out of necessity, and let me give you an example. In my previous role at Enterprise Florida, I was actually at Enterprise Florida before I came to CareerSource Florida. We would be working with businesses, and the question that a business almost always asks you is, do you have the workforce that we need to maintain our operations? Yes. Do you have the workforce we need to grow our operations? Yes. Do you have the workforce that we'll need in the future as we continue to morph and become something bigger and better than what we're starting with here? And the answer is always yes. And that's great. It's a great start. Problem is they've gone to, well, then prove it, right? So when you get to, well, then prove it, we noticed that some of the old models that we were using to show them that we had a workforce in place were too siloed. And so oftentimes they would either over exaggerate what was available to them or would underrepresent what was available to them. And I'll tell you why. The over exaggeration of what was available to them was in fact due to a number of circumstances, but one of them being that we didn't always account in those models for the fact that individuals that they were seeking with those particular skill sets were already employed elsewhere. And that they were probably employed elsewhere in a job that was going to be really difficult to entice them away from to this new opportunity. They would also not necessarily within those models show the flow of students to other opportunities around the world or other regions within the state of Florida. And so that was the over exaggeration. Sometimes they would underrepresent. And here's why. The previous models seemed like they just didn't take into account the fact that maybe you could have a certain level of nursing and meet the business's needs, or maybe a lower level of nursing and meet the business's needs. Or perhaps with that lower level of nursing, you could get them in the door, it could meet their current needs, and then with very minimal training, could help them as they look to grow and expand and morph into those new opportunities. So we developed this market intelligence portal that looks a lot like a spider web. It's not just a one-to-one. It allows you to be able to look at both the supply that's available from a number of levels. So it allows you to look at the supply coming out of your high schools with industry certifications that could meet certain levels of need for that business. And then of course career and technicals and colleges and universities. It also cross-referenced other degrees. So many times the degrees were too limited in the previous models. We found in certain finance cases, you could have somebody with an MBA, somebody with a CPA, and they could both do the job that the business was looking for. So the market intelligence portal allowed us to really kind of cross-reference. It really truly looked like a spider web. So as individuals who are new to the thinking of the market intelligence portal would look at it, it was candidly a little confusing to them, and I understood that. But we found over time that using the model allowed us to more effectively answer the business's questions for the near term and for the longer term. And the longer term came about where we had really strong collaborative partners at the education level that began to understand our market intelligence portal so that they could then create coursework and help us to identify those individuals with degrees that could meet those needs.
So why abandon such a model, and when, to your knowledge, when was it abandoned?
To my knowledge, it's not abandoned. The market intelligence portal still exists, and so the portal itself still exists. I believe it's even being used in limited uses by one, maybe two foundations for some of their back end work that they have. But I, if it's okay with you, Bob, I'd kind of like to answer this maybe a little differently. We had a meeting, and I don't even remember when. I'm terrible with time, right? But the meeting was with Amy Baker and her team of analysts. We brought in our team of analysts at CareerSource Florida. We brought in the analysts from Labor Market Information Statistics from DEO. We brought in the analysts from the colleges, the analysts from the K-12, and the analysts from the universities. And we sat in a room at Mission San Luis, and we brought all of these folks together, and we talked about our various models and our various methodology. And the purpose of that meeting was to move us in the direction of something that's better than the previous workforce estimating conference. Recognizing that we all had different needs, but oftentimes similar goals. And the similar goal was to ensure that we had the best information for those decision makers within our organizations that had to make tough, critical choices on prioritization of policies, prioritization of budgets, prioritization of resources. And so we brought those folks together, and unfortunately, that was a one-off meeting. It was supposed to have been a series of meetings where over time we had these individuals working together to agree on a methodology that we could tweak in certain circumstances for our own particular missions, but then also come to agreement that could then lead to that next generation of the Workforce Estimating Conference. I took that conversation and actually moved it to the Higher Education Coordinating Council. And if you all will look back, and again, I don't remember exactly when, but it was a year and a half ago, we had a recommendation where we were asking the legislature to formalize what this process could be and should be. And I took it a step further because I believe that Amy Baker and her shop would be the best lead on this because of their positioning with the legislature, because of the critical need that they have, because of the budgets and the policy that they're attached to. And we just really felt like she and her team were in the prime position for that. Unfortunately, there was no traction on that particular issue. And Bob, candidly,
And when you say traction, are you talking about by the players or by the legislature?
by the legislature, maybe by the players as well. I'm not exactly certain why various players wouldn't be more engaged, except I did notice in the meeting that, as is typically the case, folks are kind of wedded to their own methodologies. And so sometimes there's a little resistance perhaps to change. I wouldn't say there was ever a concerted effort not to do anything about it or with it, so much as perhaps it's so in the weeds in terms of how you look at data, how you analyze data. It gets complex. Like I said, I ended up having to spend a lot more time in this world than I ever expected to. That maybe given a 60-day legislative session and the few months of committee weeks before that, it just wasn't something that they ended up getting into. But I think that if our state leaders would spend a little bit more time with this, and perhaps the Florida Council 100, Tax Watch, others, we would see real tangible benefits, because the tools are out there now, the methodology is out there now, and I think it can help us come to much better conclusions from the data that we have available to us.
Talk to us about that. Talk to us about the tools that are now available and the way that the players can come together. What has to happen to make this thing a reality?
Leadership. It's absolutely about leadership. We need the legislature. We need the governor and his office to just spend a little time understanding what this can do for our state, how transformative it can be if we really dive down and understand what it means to build a demand-driven system. And we're so close in this state. I mean, we truly are, Bob. We are this close. And the Higher Education Coordinating Council can help a lot with that. And again, it's another one of those bodies that doesn't sound real sexy, but has the players there, because we have the publics, we have the privates, we have enterprise, we have career source, we have universities, colleges. I mean, everybody's there to kind of on the tangible. I guess they can tangibly make it happen. But if the legislature and the governor would just spend just a little time to understand what's being discussed and the value that could be derived by pursuing a demand-driven model and doing whatever they have to do to kind of give the nod that they want all these players to get together and make it happen, I think that we'd see really positive results.
Any statements about the new tools that you mentioned?
Yeah. I think the state is heading in the right direction, without a doubt. I'm trying to remember the name of all the various technologies that we put in place, but what we now have are web-based applications that allow students to make better decisions. I mean, it's closer to demand-driven than it's ever been in the past. Like, they can really start to understand, and it's all free and available to them and their parents and guidance counselors. They can understand what's out there in the marketplace today. There are tools that are in place on the back end that help them kind of get a sneak peek as to what's coming in the future, and more importantly, helps them understand the skill sets that they have to have. And then it ties those skill sets to their own coursework, so they can evaluate where they are today and what they need to do to get to where they want to be in the future. And I think that's positive. But again, all of this technology is only as good as the amount of time that you put it to work. In other words, what I mean is you have to use it. It doesn't do it on its own for you. It's simply just the tool for decision making.
Understood. Any ideas or thoughts that you would have of what would be your approach if you were Amy Baker or others that are involved in the process right now of reconstituting the Workforce Estimating Conference that was, I think the last time they met was September 2013. What would you do? How would you approach it?
I would ask Amy to consider looking seriously at the demand-driven model. And I believe without putting words in her mouth that she's there. I mean, I've really enjoyed working with Amy Baker over the years. she quote unquote gets it. What I would recommend that she do is that she gather together those players that we had, but don't just gather them together to have another conversation. Put together a really strong agenda where you start with the end in mind, and I think she has an idea of what the end in mind could look like. Take a look at, in essence, chartering this group and tell them we want to come to an agreement on a methodology that we can use that allows us to look at the demand of the future, and then also recognize that we're going to talk to each of our principals about what the tool does and what the tool doesn't do. And that's just as important. You have to educate those who use the tools that you develop as to what their strengths and their weaknesses are, and then they agree to put that tool in front of their decision makers with the analysis in front of their decision makers, and then again tell them the strengths and the weaknesses, and then ask them to at least use that as an evaluative criteria as they're making decisions about standards and curriculum and programs and work experience.
We're here with Chris Hart, the Vice President of Florida Tax Watch. Chris, thank you so much. Your insights have been very, very valuable, and we appreciate your time today.
Well, thanks, Bob. I appreciate it.